Hello, my name is Ihor Havryshchak. It gives me great pleasure to welcome our guest. She is an Americanist, a PhD candidate in history, a political scientist who knows more about U.S. history and traditions than the 47th president. Alexandra, hello. MAGA is the Republicans, a group that supports Trump. In light of the latest news, I take it we can say, make America and Greenland again. Yes, it may not sound perfect, but there's a point to it. Obviously, our viewers know what we're talking about. Trump again is talking about the fact that he wants to annex Greenland, and he hasn't ruled out the possibility that he might use troops. How serious is this, Alexander? How much of this is populism from Trump? Why didn't he mention Greenland until November 5th, before Election Day? And how are Americans reacting to that? Why didn't he mention this before the election? Why didn't he talk about this during the campaign? While he said this back in the first administration, it's worth noting that Trump made a lot of promises during the campaign. How nice that everyone is distracted by Greenland, discussing whether or not there will be an introduction of U.S. troops into Danish-controlled territory and Panama. What's going to happen with that? And somehow, everyone forgot that Trump promised to end Russia's war with Ukraine in 24 hours, lower food prices and lower gasoline prices in 24 hours, and deport 11 million illegal immigrants in the first few days. Now everyone is focused on completely different topics. Such a perfect distraction from all of Trump's promises. They have some basis behind them. Here we need to look a little deeper into the situation, and behind the fog that Trump has cast, we need to remember at least two facts that are known, thanks to, among other things, past publications of the Pentagon. Since 2005, Russia has reopened 50 Soviet military bases in the Arctic region. Now, according to U.S. data, Russia has a 1-to-3 ratio of military bases compared to the U.S. So Russia has 3 times as many military bases. And if you take icebreakers, for example, Russia has 40 of them, which are located in the Arctic region. The United States has 15, Denmark 6, and Canada 6. In other words, Russia is ahead in the Arctic region of all countries that have access to the Arctic. The second point is that in 2007, Russia put such a ceremonial flag under the North Pole. It's just that the divers put a Russian flag there. 2007, before the Russian invasion of Georgia, before the realization of who Putin was, which they did not want to look at for a long time. At the beginning of the war in 2014, they didn't realize it either, and only realized it in 2022. In 2007, Russia put that ceremonial flag there. Everyone laughed. But then Russia also quietly filed documents with the UN claiming this territory. And these documents have been under review for a very long time. In 2023, the UN addressed the issue and confirmed Russia's claim to the territory. These are not the final word, but it's a letdown nonetheless. With a full-scale invasion of Ukraine already underway. And if these Russian claims are further confirmed, that's an additional 1.7 million kilometers of seabed. There are millions of tons of oil, millions of cubic meters of gas, and so on. It is clear that it is impossible now, but theoretically there are serious deposits there. If you strip it down a little bit, there are real U.S. concerns behind it, which, it should be said, were not voiced by Donald Trump himself, but which were voiced in various Pentagon documents, among other things. In 2023, Russia signed a new maritime doctrine, and the U.S. has expressed its concerns about this strategy, Russia's strategy. The U.S. Department of Defense published a report in July of the 24th that Russia and China have strong claims to the Arctic region, and this is due to geopolitical events, the unfreezing of Soviet military bases and China's attempt to build the northern trade route. This has nothing to do with Greenland. This is a conversation with China. Alexandra, thank you for making it clear, because you've answered my next question. I'd like to ask about Russia. Here you remember early 2000, divers, flag, 2007, even before the invasion of Georgia. Do you think that all these plans for the expansion of the Caucasus, partly Ukraine, have been underway since 2008, the 7th or 8th year, if I'm not mistaken, the Munich conference, where Putin first rebuked the North Atlantic Alliance that a unipolar world cannot exist? Apparently, yes. And as many political scientists have been saying for a long, long time, Abbas Galyamov talked about it, that you should have listened to Putin. He honestly stated that, yes, this is NATO's expansion to the east. This is his endless repetition of this mantra, not to allow NATO's expansion to the east. But at the same time, we all realize that Sweden and Finland joined the North Atlantic Alliance precisely because of Vladimir Putin, because of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Thus, he brought NATO closer to Russia's borders. But in any case, yes, he was talking about it back then. These all put up mock ceremonial flags and quietly submitted applications to the UN. So much for the distraction work. Distracted, a ceremonial flag, and in reality they file such applications, attempts to gain even more territory. And now, even more so for Moscow, China, Beijing is a crucial potential ally. And of course, Putin is now willing to do anything for Mr. Xi, since China is interested in a northern sea route that would cut the path of Chinese goods to Europe by 40% and significantly reduce the path of Chinese goods to Canada and the United States. Of course, if China is interested in this, Russia will do everything for this. By the way, I have already said, you have partially answered this question. Here's Trump's statement about Greenland. Now, I understand why, but still, there is a grain here that he wants to show that Putin, you do what you want in this world, on this planet, you can violate all the rights. I, Trump, the 47th President of the United States, can claim Greenland, Canada, the Panama Canal, and the Gulf of Mexico by renaming it the American Bay. Is he so trying to terrify Putin, or what else does Trump want to show with these statements? He really wants to show that he claims all of this, but I think it's still a conversation with China, first of all, because Russia for the United States is an old enemy from the Cold War. The Cold War feud, that period just between the USSR and the United States. Russia is not as important to the United States now as it was during the Cold War. Now, China is interested in China as a rival, as an adversary, both in the diplomatic sense, in the economic sense, in the military sense. That's who the main rival of the United States is. So first of all, it is a conversation with China, with Russia, insofar as Russia has access to the Arctic region. That's the concern, of course. But Donald Trump, Even if it happens that Denmark and Greenland, the government of Greenland, agree to some kind of purchase by the United States, if indeed something like that could happen, it would be some kind of, let's say, territory outside the states, or like Puerto Rico, which is not part of the United States. But the people of Puerto Rico have American passports. They can't vote in elections. If that happens, it's not a given that American taxpayers will support it, given that since 1951. The U.S. has arrangements with Greenland that don't require possession of the territory. But even if that happens, on the contrary, Donald Trump will show how you can annex territories or incorporate them into the United States or into the orbit of the United States, not militarily by any means, but in this kind of economic way by interest and so on. I mean, it seems to me that it's not primarily Russia we're talking about here. Russia is basically just military power, brute military force, and access to the Arctic. First of all, the conversation with China. If it is a division into spheres of influence, it also applies to the indirect conversation with China. However, having said all that, it still seems to me that it is very unlikely that anything will be done about Greenland, because even now, these attempts to show how Greenlanders want to become part of the U.S. really make Greenland great again, and so on. And Donald Trump's son's trip is still elements of the show, I think, to a greater extent. I'm not sure how that would work out, since the U.S. taxpayers won't want to pay big bucks for Greenland, given that the U.S. already has a military base and diplomatic support there. But the U.S. military has also already told veterans organizations that traditionally support the Republican Party. And they supported Trump in the election. They continue to support Republicans. Already some of them have said Trump promised not to send the U.S. military anywhere. He said that wars didn't start with him, and he's a peacemaker worthy of the Nobel Peace Prize, literally. And then all of a sudden he started talking about the fact that militarily he didn't rule out some kind of impact on Greenland. American veterans organizations are a big force in politics, and they clearly won't support this. What's most interesting is Trump's attitude toward Russia's war in Ukraine. Here, Kellogg said, officially there was no notification, but allegedly he was supposed to fly to Kyiv and a number of European countries in early January. But again, whether he postponed his visit before the inauguration or after the inauguration, I've never been able to explain to myself. But they say he did. Why is that? Why did he delay? Do we need to understand anything from that? Or does it indicate that there's really no plan right now? Because again, 24 hours, then Trump said 24 hours, I'm not going to make it, or however you can say it. First, the media reported 6 months, then 100 days, then May 20th, May 9th, and by that date, every date was already being called. They also said that in February, if Kyiv or Moscow did not agree to Trump's terms, he would accuse one of the parties of derailing the talks. That's typical Trump. That's his strategy. May forbid, may allow, may send, may not send, may meet, may not meet. It's kind of a fog that's very difficult to navigate. Really, I just haven't had time to keep up with when Donald Trump promises to end all wars in the world, end Russia's war with Ukraine, and generally bring about world peace. And you don't have time to keep track of it. As for Kellogg's visit, the first 100 days of a presidency, that's the kind of symbolic cutoff that always happens. Kellogg said Trump would have time to end Russia's war with Ukraine in that time frame. But as far as the visit is concerned, it is not very clear in what capacity Keith Kellogg would go to Kyiv, because now officially the Biden administration is still in place. The Biden administration continues its work. Kellogg's visit is parallel diplomacy. While he could have come on a private visit, everyone would have realized that he represents Donald Trump. It was decided by the Trump administration's transition team that everything would have to be held after January 20th. Still, understanding that no one will meet the 24-hour deadline and that it's a lost cause to build some cutoffs. Apparently, the realization has come to the Trump administration. It must be said that Marco Rubio also played an important role here, with whom Donald Trump, after another meeting, made some gestures that seemed to be more in line with American foreign policy. But that's about as far as postponing China's visit. Still, need the White House to deal with it. Plus everything else about Venezuela. Now also Trump made some statements after meeting with Marco Rubio. And it speaks already further there. We won't go into detail about things that relate to Latin American countries, but it speaks to who's really in charge of American foreign policy. Quietly, Marco Rubio is doing it. The future U.S. Secretary of State, the man who in 2014 called for sanctions against Russia, not imposed until 2022 after the invasion, is doing this. He's been talking about this since the beginning of the war. He said that it was impossible to interact with Putin and his cronies in any way. This is the man who authored the legislation that made it more difficult for the U.S. to withdraw from the North Atlantic Alliance. Here's who Marco Rubio is. Marco Rubio, while he is a classic neoconservative Republican politician, has nothing to do with the MAGA movement or the MGHA. If we are talking about Greenland, he is an absolutely classic Republican politician who has clearly defined his line and is moving along it. Here now, of course, we can expect anything from Trump, but clearly the understanding of the complexity of the situation has finally fully arrived. You and I brought this up in our first conversations as well. Trump's next statement about Biden making trouble. Biden is responsible for what happened in Afghanistan, because Biden came out of Afghanistan in a way that showed Putin, here attack. So on Ukraine, that's what Trump said. But I am more interested in his statements regarding the North Atlantic Alliance, because I understand that he has already officially said no to Ukraine in NATO. How to take his words, what Putin knew. He has long said that Ukraine should not be in NATO. Biden made a promise, said he wanted Ukraine in NATO, and that's why Putin attacked. Trump fails to mention that there is Finland, the Baltic states, and other countries on the border with Russia that are NATO members. These statements Trump is referring to. He did it in an interesting way, in the spirit of how he commented on the use of U.S. weapons on military installations on Russian territory. This one is absolutely from the same series. Logically, I may not ban it. The same thing he said. I understand Russia's feelings about the North Atlantic Alliance and about its coming closer to Russia's borders. Everyone in the Kremlin immediately cried and opened the champagne. But they opened the champagne early. It has nothing to do with diplomacy. We will act this way, and this way. I can ban it, or I can allow it, or I can put more guns on it. This is all a classic trick, too. How does this relate to politics? The feeling is separate. He really likes to do that. He really likes to praise Xi and then impose tariffs against China. or praise Erdogan and then put pressure on Turkey. This is how Trump very often acts, putting his opponent to sleep with some statements. Once again, that's what Trump has said. He said Biden is to blame for the war. And he immediately named a war that needs to be stopped urgently. So we're paying attention here. Biden is to blame, but Trump's attitude toward the war is what do we get? It's tragic, it's horrible, it needs to stop immediately. What's his take on Russia's invasion of Ukraine? How he will act next, knowing and understanding how Trump acts, is utterly impossible to predict. These statements are always like that. They're two-sided. They can be read in different ways. The Kremlin really wants to read how Trump understands everything, and then statements are made. The Financial Times published an article quoting its sources in Russia. The Financial Times reports that the Kremlin will try to persuade Donald Trump to have North Atlantic Alliance troops pulled back from Russia's borders. We are talking about Lithuania, Latvia, Poland, Finland. If we talk about Lithuania, the German military is there, first of all. How will Trump influence Germany? This is Putin's wish, his fixation on not expanding NATO to the east. This is the same phrase he kept repeating and repeating. Not an extension. And in the end, it all came down to NATO's eastward expansion. Is that why all these statements by Trump? They can be read very differently. As for assistance, that is not assistance, but inviting Ukraine to the North Atlantic Alliance. Here's where Trump also did not deny, rather than confirm, but one of the Trump team's proposals that J.D. Vance was voicing was that there should be a 20-year waiver for Ukraine to join NATO. Nevertheless, knowing Donald Trump, who maximizes the stakes and then goes on a retreat as a businessman, he sets the highest price and then lowers it a little bit, lowers it, and eventually we're 20, 15, 10, maybe things will be decided differently. We'll find out when everyone's at the negotiating table. I would refer to monographs published after the first Trump administration by members of his team. These books can be found on Amazon or other sites that sell works by Trump White House advisors and staff. Everyone is talking about the same thing, Trump's approach to negotiations. He has some purpose, and very often he sits down at the negotiating table without having any additional options on how one should get to that goal. He very often has a goal, and he goes for it. He believes that his charm, his power of persuasion, is enough to achieve what he wants. Here is apparently the same situation now, just as Trump has acted throughout his business career. There is a certain goal, and how to get there is still very unclear, and the options can be very different. So we will probably find out about this when real negotiations take place, not behind-the-scenes negotiations like the ones that are taking place now with Moscow and the open ones that are taking place with Kyiv. Because once again, it's important to emphasize that the call with Zelensky came before any contacts with Moscow. Alexandra, you mentioned the Financial Times article, if I'm not mistaken. They say the troops are from Eastern Europe. I don't know who the original source is. I spoke to Grozev from Bulgaria in an interview, and he was referenced afterwards. He said the following: allegedly his sources from Moscow, and this person has good connections as far as I know, claim that the Kremlin is ready to give consent for Ukraine to join NATO on condition that the United States of America will remove its troops from Eastern and Europe. And then in the long run, there might be some kind of hybrid warfare on the part of Moscow, and there will be no U.S. soldiers in Eastern Europe. The U.S. will not take the responsibility to go to war in Europe. That's what I always agree with Christoph Grozev. This could look exactly the same for Trump. He promised not to send American soldiers anywhere. And great, he is pleased the U.S. military. Let's pull back from Russia's borders. Maybe we should add some German ones. Maybe we'll add European ones to the territory of Ukraine. It's not like it's the U.S. military. It would be beneficial to Trump from the domestic political side because he promised it to his constituents, the Republicans who voted for him. That would really keep Ukraine safe because, of course, no American troops, but maybe American weapons, maybe European soldiers. But American in no way. That being said, teaching is another matter. Maybe teaching can be done. But either way, it would from all accounts be a good move for Trump if such a thing were possible. Trump, again, as such a businessman, here you can raise the stakes in order to then do a little bit of some backtracking. There is no American military at all on the borders with Russia, but there are others. That would also be in the spirit of Trump. Alexandra, as in Harry Potter, not mentioning the name of someone you can't mention. Elon Musk. We've talked about how he's taken on Schultz too, but now he's taking on the UK's Keir Starmer. We know perfectly well that he has a social network. X prescribes there. He has a lot of subscribers there. I have a question as to how much he really influences and upsets domestic politics, both in Germany and in the UK. Or is it just that the man who has the biggest fortune in the world can afford it? But no more, talking about the problems that exist within individual countries. Both internally and separately, the conversation with and in relation to Elon Musk is encouraging German society to discuss domestic issues. As far as Starmer is concerned, especially in the run-up to the visit to Kyiv, or at least the suggested visit, it's also some internal pressure that exists. Usually Musk does comment on the politics of countries where he has some interests. Regarding Germany, the interests are very definite. It's about the Tesla plant. Elon Musk is an orchestra man who has Twitter, Tesla, various IT technologies. And he literally just spoke in Las Vegas, where there's a major scientific conference going on right now, where Elon Musk spoke out and revealed that his company's chip, another of its dozens of IT technologies, has been successfully implanted in yet another test subject, and they expect 20,000 to 30,000 such chips to be implanted in the coming year. Elon Musk is an absolute orchestra man. So here, follow the money. You have to follow the money. Maybe there are some financial interests relating to the UK. Maybe it has to do with the fact that Trump has unexpectedly offered the position of special envoy for the UK. U.S. presidential special envoys are usually people who deal with some kind of military conflicts, humanitarian disasters. Here is a special envoy on such and such topics, because an ambassador, for example, deals with one thing, and a special envoy deals with events of special importance that concern the country to which the special envoy goes. What about London? London has a huge American embassy. The UK doesn't seem to have any special problems, so it's odd why a special envoy when the country already has an American ambassador and a host of other advisors to that ambassador. The US Embassy in London covers a vast area. But there will be this special envoy, and it's about the US and UK agreements that Trump wants to get post-Brexit. Trump wants some kind of preferential treatment from the UK. Maybe Elon Musk will be doing that as well. So it seems to me that everything that relates to Elon Musk's statements, apart from the fact that it has to do with his personal interests and the interests of his companies, may also relate to some interests in this situation of Trump and his ideas about how relations with the UK should be established. Alexandra, also yesterday, the United States imposed sanctions against more than 30 Russian oil and gas companies. There's a very serious list, I read, Gazprom Neft and also Surgut Neftegaz. These are serious companies. The notice says that these companies allegedly produce and sell many millions of barrels of oil there, which is billions for the Russian budget. This will be a serious blow to Russia's economy. Following the US and Great Britain led the sanctions, but there they shouted very loudly that we hit the money that goes to war. I have a question. Why now? Populist stuff. Biden, in leaving, imposed really very strong these sanctions, and subsequently we'll see in the next few months. Can these sanctions be lifted by Trump? And how would that even work? They talk about lifting sanctions, lifting some other bans in Russia. How involved should Congress be here? Because I know that there are both Republicans and Democrats in Congress, in both houses, who do not support what Trump is saying about Russia at all. They further want to help. There is a bipartisan consensus in Congress to support Ukraine. Once again, I would like to refer to an already historic example, the allocation of a $60 billion aid package to Ukraine. After all, the Trumpists did not put it up for a vote, blocked it in every possible way, precisely because there were enough votes, including from the Republican Party, to pass this Ukraine aid bill. Republicans support continued aid to Ukraine. Those sanctions that have been imposed are measures really against oil companies and measures aimed at Russia's shadow fleet, because there are different tankers that are used to circumvent oil price restrictions imposed on Russia. The U.S. estimates that the new sanctions will cost Russia billions of dollars a month. No one can provide exact figures, but billions of dollars a month. The White House says Trump could theoretically lift these new sanctions with the need to still run it through Congress. It's important to note, this is to the conversation to our earlier one regarding this business approach of Trump. There is far more alignment between the Trump transition administration and the current White House administration than meets the eye. At first glance, they seem to contradict each other in many respects regarding domestic policy. But on the outside, there are agreements. These are the points of contact that they have. And we're seeing that with some examples. It seems like these sanctions are something that Trump can lift without lifting the myriad of other sanctions that have been imposed on Russia over the last nearly 3 years since the full-scale invasion began. Many people have said that Russia will seek the lifting of sanctions. We'll have to push for new sanctions to be lifted. And those all can stay. Perhaps this is a step that will allow Donald Trump to go and say, yes, I will do everything now. If you do this, this, and this, if Russia agrees to this, this, and this, I will lift the sanctions. But not all the sanctions that have been imposed before today, but new ones. These are the new ones. Maybe I can cancel them. However, it will really have to go through Congress. And if Donald Trump does not have some clear answer from Russia, which he can give to congressmen, to say, here they agreed to this, now we can lift the sanctions, then it's not going to be easy for him to do that either. But in terms of some kind of countermeasures, confrontation, Trump and Biden have a serious confrontation in domestic politics. In the external, there is this consent. And the sanctions can be lifted, but I think they're put in place in part to give Trump the opportunity to take this as if it's a visible step back. Yesterday, Friday, a New York court sentenced President-elect Trump of the United States of America in a fraud case. A porn actress he paid to keep quiet. I'll quote because it's incomprehensible. Explain it. He is determined to be released. This means that the court found Trump guilty of the crime, but found it wrong to sentence him to a fine, probation, or jail time. The judge wished him luck as he begins his second term as president. If there is no punishment, then why judge? This symbolic meaning is very large. The first U.S. president in history, former president and future president of the United States, to be convicted on 34 felony counts. It has to do with payments to porn actress Stormy Daniels in 2016 to keep voters from finding out about their affair. I was actually expecting a fine. Many were very much expecting a fine, myself included, as incarceration was certainly out of the question. Even if we exclude Trump's personality, if he wasn't president, if he wasn't a businessman, if he was just some person who would do such a thing, who had nothing to do with politics or big business, who had no special name. After all, American law is case law. And if there are no previous criminal offenses, if the article under which the accused is charged provides for a small term of imprisonment and as a basic fine, then of course the person is sentenced to a fine, not to a trial or imprisonment. Trump would not have been sentenced to prison, but a fine was still expected. Nevertheless, it is an unconditional release. The judge made reference to the fact that this verdict does not overturn the indictment, but it is related to the president's partial legal defense, because it will make it more difficult for him to hold office. Trump is not happy with the sentencing. He believes he is innocent. He should be acquitted. And Trump's team will appeal. They will be seeking a guilty plea to 34 counts of criminal charges. Trump remains an indicted felon, yet unpunished. Such are the mishaps of American law. The important thing, Alexandra, is that Trump doesn't say, wait, I'm in court. Alexandra, thank you for this conversation. I'm sure I can tell by the comments from our viewers. Thank you very much. Let me guess, we were joined by political scientist and PhD in history, Alexandra Filippenko. Subscribe, comment, you will know better what is going on in the USA, and it is very useful because it is Ukraine's main partner. My name is Ihor Havryshchak.